Okay, hello everyone, and welcome back to Common English Mistakes. Don't just learn, improve. So today's mistake comes from a very nice French woman who worked at a campsite I recently stayed at in France. She had a very good level of English, but like a lot of people do, made a mistake with at on in when talking about where things were in the campsite. Prepositions in English, often very complicated. This is a particularly complicated area. However, it will start off relatively easy, and as we get a bit more complicated, I'll ask some questions to test your understanding. I've also got some phrases and compound nouns associated with the language, and a lot of these are very useful. So anyway, this wasn't her actual mistake, but it's the same kind of problem. So we sat on the middle of the row in the cinema. So just pause the video, try to correct the sentence. And well done if you said we sat in the middle of the row. So this is something I hear a lot, and one of the main things to take away from today's lesson. When you have something between two extremes, we're going to say the middle of. And always make sure it's the preposition in the middle of. It can be literal in the real world, like sitting in the middle of the row or standing in the middle of a line, or it can be with things like time. I was born in the middle of the year, in late April. Can also be in a sentence. I always say, don't put a time expression in the middle of a sentence. And this can also be in the middle of something vertical. At the moment, Fulham are in the middle of the Premier League. Or our son's exam results were in the middle of the class. To talk about the opposite, the extremes, if it's something with a beginning, start, and an end, you just use those phrases. Here, though, with the preposition at. So, January is at the start of the year, December at the end. You can put a time expression at the beginning of a sentence, at the end of a sentence. With the original example, obviously here there is no start, there's just two ends. In this example, you can say sit at the end, on the end. With other things like a line, you can only say at. If it's something vertical, you're going to say the top of, the bottom of. Generally with the preposition at. So Arsenal are at the top of the league. Burnley are at the bottom. However, if you're talking about the very top or the very bottom, you can also say on, with the definite article the being optional for on top of. So, Man City are on top of the league, as ever. Luton Town are on the bottom. Another example, there's a lot of trash at the top of Mount Everest, the general area. It's a great feeling to stand on top of a mountain, the highest point. Similarly, at the bottom of the ocean, you find very strange fish and animals. The Titanic is on the bottom of the sea, the very bottom. There are some useful ways to use the phrase in the middle of, plus noun or verb ing. You can use it to talk about being in the middle of an activity or action. I was in the middle of cooking dinner when the phone rang. Or for a longer process. We are in the middle of moving house. Also, it's very useful to say you're busy with something. For example, your phone rings in a meeting, you text the person, say, I'm sorry I can't talk, I'm in the middle of a meeting, busy with the meeting. And then you can also be or be caught in the middle of something. Something bad is happening either side of you and you're in the middle. Usually this is an argument. Two friends are arguing and you're caught in the middle, trying to calm things. And then there are some useful compound nouns. The middle child is the child between the oldest and the youngest when people have 3 or more children. Middle ground is a compromise, maybe in a negotiation or discussion. Middle name, first, middle, and surname. A middle manager or middle management is a manager in a company, but not a very high one. Middle-aged, which I'm moving towards, is these days around 40 to 60. And one more useful one to describe a place very remote, far away from civilization, is the middle of nowhere. And again, make sure you say he lives in the middle of nowhere. So now I'm going to show you what this woman actually said to me, which is there's a shop on the middle of the campsite. Obviously, we want to say in the middle. But just pause the video and think why this isn't entirely correct and doesn't sound very good, given that the middle is between two extremes and we're talking about a campsite. And well done if you said something like the middle we're using to talk about lines. Here we have an area. You're talking about this, or maybe something three-dimensional, make sure you say the center. So there's a shop in the center of the campsite. Other examples, a bullseye is in the center of a dartboard. There are a lot of skyscrapers in the center of New York. And three-dimensional, the center of the earth is mostly iron. Now it's going to get a bit confusing. The opposite of the center is generally going to be the edge of something. Firstly, as I said in a recent video, you don't talk about the edge of a town or city. Make sure you learn the phrase the outskirts with the preposition on. So there are usually factories on the outskirts of a city. For everything else, when you want to talk about the edge, you can say either at the edge, on the edge, and there is a little difference in meaning. At the edge means close to, in the general area, whereas on the edge is very, very close to, or maybe actually on the line. So that being said, if you say the girl stood at the edge of a cliff or on the edge of a cliff, which do you think is more dangerous and would make you feel more nervous? Pause the video and have a think about this question. And well done if you said she stood on the edge of a cliff is more dangerous. I sometimes stand at the edge of a cliff, enjoy the view, whereas I think most people, if they see people standing on the edge of a cliff, it makes them feel quite nervous. Another question, do you think you would stand at the edge of the water or on the edge of the water at a lake? And well done if you said you generally stand at the edge of the water. If you stand on the edge of the water, you're going to get your feet wet. Here, there's a nice little phrase which sounds quite poetic, at the water's edge. So let's now look at the non-literal uses of center and edge. Generally, you're going to say at the center of, not in, to say someone is very involved in something. For example, the referee was at the center of a massive controversy in a football match. The banker was at the center of a massive case of fraud, a financial crime. That's for when the context is bad or negative things. In other contexts, I would just use the adjective central. So you wouldn't say Frodo is at the center of the Lord of the Rings. you'd say he's a central character. Again, then on the edge of something means very close to, and this is a negative thing. So for example, the company is on the edge of collapse, or she was on the edge of tears when she heard the news. You can also use on the verge of, means the same thing. And that one you can also use for positive or neutral things. So we are on the verge of moving house. Neutral, neither good or bad. The team is on the verge of winning the league. A very positive thing. And then some more phrases using edge or on the edge. You can talk about being on the edge of your seat, very excited or nervous, watching something like a film or a football match. On edge, useful adjective phrase, meaning nervous or anxious. When I have an exam the next day, I'm a bit on edge. And finally, you can talk about being on the edge, close to danger or in a risky situation. Isle of Man TT riders live life on the edge. Best example I can think of. Anyway, we're 2/3 of the way through. Before we move on to the last part, this is a very complicated area of English, but I think I'm giving quite a good explanation. If you think so too, do make sure to like, subscribe if you haven't done so already. Does mean a lot, guys. So let's now move on to the last part, describing geographical areas or things like photos and pictures. Geography, nice and easy. The preposition is basically always in. So if we look at our map of Spain, it's a nice example. Madrid is in the center, Malaga is in the south, and Barcelona is in the northeast. Describing a photo, picture, or document, a little bit more difficult, but not impossible. Let's take this famous photo from the Beatles album Abbey Road. As we've done before, we say in the center. So Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr are in the center. Then we say on the left and on the right. So George Harrison is on the left. John Lennon is on the right. This is also more generally true. You can use it with political stance. The Labour Party in the UK is on the left, the Conservatives on the right. Just as we saw at the start of the class, at the bottom, at the top. So there is a zebra crossing at the bottom of the photo. And then we generally say in the corner. So there is the word stereo in the top right corner of the photo. I say generally, this is for when it is an enclosed space, like in a picture, or in a room, or in a letter. You're supposed to put your address in the top left corner of a letter. If it's not, we say on the corner. So this cup is on the corner of the table, but usually you're using this talking about on the corner of a street. There is a shop on the corner of my street. And then generally we say in the corner. So there is the word studio in the top right corner of the photo. So anyway, that's that. Let's take a quick breath. English prepositions, horrible. And this is a really good example. I'm not expecting you to remember everything I've said in that video. My advice to you is to just practice, practice, practice. Googling English prepositions, practice. Find exercises. The more you do, the more you'll improve, the fewer mistakes you'll make. That being said, now I've just got a very little bit of practice and improve for you. Just pause the video and put the appropriate preposition into these sentences. And well done if you said, I feel great in the middle of the day, but tired at the end. I like to live in the center of a city because it's more exciting. I prefer to sit at or on the end of an aisle on an aeroplane. Then I don't like to be disturbed when I'm in the middle of studying. The politician was at the center of a huge scandal. And finally, if I drink too much coffee, I feel a bit on edge. So now just pause the video and write, say, or discuss the same sentences for you. And finally, today's question, how do you feel at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end of a week? You can answer the question for all three or just choose one of those. But do write your answers in the comments, guys. Good opportunity to practice. Anyway, that's basically it for today. That's a difficult one. It was quite tiring for me to make. I hope it's not too tiring for you to watch. I know it's not easy, but something like this does need a bit of practice, so make sure you do lots. Other than that, I'll see you for another video in the next couple of days. So until next time, see ya.